Morning at Everidge Harbor was so cold that even breath seemed to crystallize mid-air. Inside the refrigerated truck parked in the shadows of the harbor, a Border Patrol agent lay motionless, lips blue, eyelashes crusted with frost. Beside him, his service dog, its fur glazed with frost, pressed its body tightly against his chest, as if trying to keep him alive. His name was Noah Carter, a Border Patrol officer who had once saved dozens along the southern line. Now, he was the one waiting to be saved. The entire harbor stood silent while a good man slowly froze to death just 3 miles from the police station. That's the kind of silence the world has grown used to keeping. Then, through the heavy fog, a figure emerged. Veteran Raymond Cole, limping through the snow in a torn military coat, walking beside a dog named Max. The scars of war were written deep across his face, yet in his eyes remained one truth: never leave anyone behind. He didn't ask who they were. He only said softly, "Not while I'm still here." That moment marked the beginning of a story Everidge would never forget. Before the story begins, remember to like, share, and subscribe if you still believe justice deserves a voice. And tell us, where are you watching from? Because what happened that night deserves to be heard in every corner of this world. The harbor of Everidge slept beneath a film of frost, its cranes rising like rusted bones against a pale, breathless sky. Wind from the northern inlet dragged the scent of iron and salt across the docks, where forgotten ships moored like ghosts of better days. The only sound was the dull rhythm of water licking concrete and the slow groan of ropes stiff with ice. It was a morning that carried no promise, only the weight of what time had left behind. Raymond Cole moved through the stillness with the quiet gait of a man who had long ago learned to read silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that hums beneath diesel fumes and broken promises. He was a veteran without a war, a man who had once commanded platoons, now reduced to speaking mostly to the wind. His face, carved by years of dust and discipline, wore a calm that only those who have seen too much can bear. The creases around his eyes held stories no one asked to hear anymore. Beside him walked Max, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a body of muscle and patience. The dog's coat, sable mixed with gray from age, still gleamed faintly under the harbor's dull light. His steps were measured, his eyes alert. Even in retirement, he moved like a soldier. When the world had turned its back on Raymond, Max had stayed. Together they drifted through the corners of Everidge, sleeping under cranes, near warehouses that hummed with electricity, surviving on coffee, canned beans, and the dignity of not asking for pity. That morning, something in the air shifted. The wind changed direction, carrying not just the sting of cold, but the taste of fear, faint, metallic, human. Raymond slowed. Max's ears lifted, his gaze sharpening toward the row of containers stacked like tombstones by the waterfront. Between them, a single refrigerated truck sat crooked, its door sealed tight but trembling ever so slightly, as if something inside was breathing. He approached slowly, boots crunching against frost, breath rising in brief clouds. His instincts, dulled by years of silence, flared alive. The same instinct that had once made him duck seconds before gunfire. There was no sound now, only the whisper of the wind brushing past metal. Yet something inside that truck felt wrong, the way still water feels before it breaks. Raymond pressed his hand to the door. The steel was colder than ice, the kind of cold that burns. For a moment he hesitated. Then he unlatched the handle and pulled. The door groaned open. A burst of air rolled out, thick, heavy, and bitter with death. Inside lay a man, motionless, his skin tinged blue, lips cracked and bleeding, frost clinging to his lashes like salt. A badge hung from his jacket, half buried in frost. Agent Noah Carter, U.S. Border Patrol. His eyes were closed, but his hands were bound, rope cutting into the skin where the blood had already frozen. Beside him, a dog, a large Belgian Malinois, lay curled tight, its muzzle bound with silver tape, chest rising faintly beneath layers of ice. Raymond stood still for a moment. The smell of diesel and rot filled his throat. The world outside seemed to fall away, leaving only the pulse of time that still beat somewhere between life and the silence of what was coming. Then instinct took over. He climbed in. The cold bit through his coat as he tore the tape from the animal's muzzle. The dog gasped, a shallow, raspy sound. Raymond pressed his coat against the agent's chest, his fingers numb, whispering a prayer that came out like fog. "Hold on," he muttered. Not to anyone, not even to himself, but to the universe that had already taken too much. Max stepped closer, his breath visible in the freezing air. He nudged the wounded dog gently, then looked up at Raymond with eyes that still carried orders. It was a look Raymond hadn't seen since his own service days, one that said, "He's not gone yet." He rubbed the man's sternum, waiting, hoping, refusing the silence. Then, barely audible, a gasp. A single painful breath dragged through the cold, breaking the stillness like a match flaring in darkness. Raymond leaned close. The sound came again, faint, trembling, but real. Outside, the first light of dawn cracked open, a faint streak of gold slicing through the gray fog. It touched the frost-covered truck, glinting off the man's badge as if to remind the world he still existed. Raymond eased him onto the floor, wrapping him tighter in the coat. Max stood at the door, ears pricked toward the open harbor. Somewhere out there, a sound echoed, a low mechanical hum, maybe an engine idling. The dog stiffened. Raymond turned his head. Beyond the haze of mist, a pair of headlights flickered once, pale and deliberate, watching, waiting. Then, as quietly as they appeared, they vanished. For a long moment, Raymond didn't move. He stood in the open door of that frozen tomb, the wind cutting through his hair, the breath of life still trembling in the air behind him. Something unseen had just taken notice. Someone, somewhere, now knew they were alive. He closed the door halfway, shielding the man from the wind. The horizon blushed faintly with light, the cranes standing like sentinels against the awakening sky. Beneath them, a veteran and a dog stood guard over a stranger, unaware that by opening one frozen door, they had also opened the first crack in a secret that had been sealed far too long. The harbor exhaled. The wind died for a moment, as if even it understood that something sacred had just happened, that life had been pulled back from the edge by hands too tired to believe in miracles, and yet too human not to try. Somewhere out at sea, a horn sounded once, low and distant. The light spread across the water like spilled silver. In that quiet, the line between the living and the lost felt paper thin. And at the heart of it all stood Raymond Cole, the man beneath the cranes, already bound to a story that would test every truth he still believed about justice, mercy, and the worth of a single heartbeat. He didn't know it yet, but the harbor had just remembered him. The shack leaned against the wind like an old man too proud to fall. Its tin roof moaned with every gust that swept in from the harbor, and each sound carried the ghost of the sea, salt, rust, and something that felt like time itself refusing to move on. Inside, Raymond Cole coaxed a flame to life inside a metal drum, its glow painting the cracked walls in trembling shades of gold and orange. The heat was meager, but after the night they'd endured, even meager felt like mercy. Noah Carter stirred on the floorboards, the color of his face thawing from gray to something human. When his eyes opened, they caught the firelight, steel gray, alert yet dulled by exhaustion, the kind of eyes that had seen authority and paid the price for it. His breathing was rough, each inhale scraping against his ribs. The man's frame was built for command, but now it was bent toward survival. The frost on his lashes melted into tears he didn't mean to shed. Max lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes never leaving the man who had nearly died in the cold. Shadow, the other K9, was wrapped in a torn blanket, chest rising unevenly. He trembled in sleep, occasionally twitching, perhaps chasing some ghost of duty through his dream. When Noah's fingers reached out, brushing the dog's muzzle, Shadow whimpered once and turned toward the warmth, trusting the hand even through pain. As sensation returned to his hands, Noah's gaze fell on the metal tag hanging from Max's collar. The letters caught the firelight. Valor, K9 Division. A faint smile flickered on his cracked lips. Still working, huh? His voice rasped like gravel. Raymond didn't answer. He just nodded toward Shadow, the rescued one, lying across Noah's knees. Their eyes met briefly. Two men on opposite sides of luck, both carrying the same fatigue that war leaves behind even when the uniform is gone. The fire whispered and shifted. Outside, the wind gnawed at the edges of the shack. Between the groans of wood and the hiss of air, the silence deepened until it became something tangible. It was then Noah began to speak, not with drama or pleading, but with the dry resignation of a man who had run out of ways to lie to himself. He told Raymond about Everfreight Logistics, a company whose trucks moved not only produce and supplies, but people, hidden in refrigerated trailers, transported like cargo. For months he had followed their routes, gathered files, faces, and license plates. Every lead circled back to the same truth. The ring was protected from within. "I thought I had them," he said, staring into the flame. "Every shipment logged, every route mapped. Then one night, someone in my own department sent me the wrong coordinates. I walked right into that truck." He paused, his fingers curling around the floorboards. "They didn't want me dead at first. Just gone. Forgotten." Raymond listened without moving, his hands steadying the log in the fire. He'd heard this tone before, in the trenches, in shelters, in every story soldiers told when the war inside their heads refused to end. Betrayal has its own language. It sounds like quiet breathing between sentences. Noah's eyes glowed amber in the firelight as he whispered, "I thought I'd seen all kinds of war, but the real ones, they wear suits now." The words hung there, half confession, half curse. Raymond looked away, his jaw tightening. The truth of it was too familiar. The wars that break men don't always leave shrapnel. Sometimes they leave signatures, reports, smiles for cameras. He stirred the fire again, not for warmth, but for something to do with his hands. The night stretched on, the storm outside fading to a low moan. The sea ice cracked in distant echoes, the sound traveling like slow thunder through the harbor's ribs. Max raised his head once, ears twitching toward the window. His tail flicked once, uncertain, then settled. But Raymond felt it too. Something in the air had shifted, as if the night itself was holding its breath. He stood, moving to the door. The cold sliced at his face as he peered out through the crack in the warped wood. The sky had darkened again, a dense fog rolling from the inlet. Then he heard it, a faint hum beneath the wind. Soft, mechanical, deliberate. Not the wind, not the sea. Noah straightened, his eyes sharpening instantly despite the pain. Raymond killed the fire with a swift motion, shoving snow and dirt over the flames. The room fell into shadow, their breath the only motion left. Through the slit in the door, tiny red lights pulsed in the fog. 3, maybe 4, hovering and moving with unnatural precision. A drone, maybe more than one. They drifted over the shipping containers, beams sweeping the yard in silent arcs. Every flash of red illuminated the frost-covered cranes, the skeletal towers standing watch over something neither man could yet name. The hum grew louder, circling the perimeter like a predator sniffing for warmth. Max pressed close to Raymond's leg, muscles tight, eyes locked on the light. Shadow whined softly, his head lifting, sensing danger even before his handler could stand. Raymond's pulse steadied, slow and cold. He'd been hunted before. He knew the rhythm of it, the false calm before discovery, the inevitable breach. He glanced at Noah, who was already crawling toward his pack, checking a sidearm half frozen but still functional. The two men didn't need to speak. Instinct bridged what words couldn't. Outside, the red lights drew nearer, their beams gliding over the cracked windows. For a heartbeat, one paused, lingering just long enough to make Raymond's hand tighten on Max's collar. Then it drifted on. A slow exhale left his chest, visible in the cold. The hum began to fade, pulling back toward the yard, but neither man moved. They listened as it vanished into the distance, swallowed by the moan of the sea. Only then did Raymond dare to breathe fully again. The fire had died completely, leaving the room steeped in shadow. In the stillness, the scent of burnt wood mingled with salt and fear. Noah leaned against the wall, exhaustion returning. He looked toward the doorway, then to the faint outlines of Max and Shadow lying side by side, their breathing syncopated, one steady, one fragile. "They'll come back," he said, voice low, certain. "They don't leave witnesses." Raymond didn't answer. He only stared out into the frost, where the cranes loomed like watchmen carved from ice. Somewhere beyond them, the truth moved with its own machinery, quiet, precise, relentless. And in that frozen stillness, between the last whisper of wind and the next pulse of danger, something old stirred within him. The soldier he thought he'd buried long ago. By sunrise, the world had turned silver. Mist hung low over the estuary where the tide gnawed gently at the frozen pier. The horizon glowed faintly pink, but the light brought no warmth, only clarity, the kind that exposes everything left behind. Raymond Cole and Noah Carter moved along the shoreline, their breaths visible in the morning chill. The old veteran's limp slowed their pace, each step grinding softly against the crusted snow, but Noah's instincts guided the way. His body still trembled from the night, yet his focus had sharpened into the kind of calm only danger can carve. Max trotted a few paces ahead, his nose sweeping the ground in short, deliberate arcs, while Shadow pressed close to Noah's leg, limping slightly but refusing to fall behind. The dogs, like their handlers, had learned that survival was a word best whispered, not spoken. The boathouse stood at the edge of the estuary, a hulking shape of warped wood and broken glass, ribs of rusted iron exposed where the siding had peeled away. A sign half buried in frost once read, "Seafarers Repair," the letters now eaten by salt and time. The building looked abandoned, but inside, the faint scent of recent smoke hinted otherwise. Raymond hesitated, listening. Only the rhythmic groan of wood under wind answered. He pushed the door open slowly. It moaned in protest, echoing like a voice that had been silenced too long. The cold inside carried the smell of salt, rust, and something older, like buried guilt. Crates lay toppled against one another, and fishing nets, stiff with age, hung from the rafters like spider webs catching dust instead of prey. They moved cautiously through the space, their footsteps crunching against ice. When Noah dropped his pack, the sound startled a gull perched in the rafters, sending a flurry of feathers through the beam of weak morning light. Raymond settled by a broken workbench, while Noah pulled a wad of soaked papers from his pocket, folded, frozen, and half torn from the night before. He spread them across the table, using an old wrench as a paperweight. The pages were covered in codes, numbers, routes, and abbreviations marked in pen that had bled into the damp paper. F9, F12, EFR. Each line meant nothing alone, but together they formed a pattern like scars on the skin of a map. Noah leaned closer, his brows drawing tight, muttering the sequence under his breath. Then, out of the dim, a voice cut through the quiet. "Those codes run out of the southern terminal," the voice said, calm but firm. Both men turned. From the shadows at the far end of the boathouse, a figure emerged. A woman, no older than 40, her features sharp against the pale light. She wore a dark parka zipped to her throat, camera straps slung across one shoulder, recorder in hand. Her breath came out in quick white bursts. She wasn't shaking from fear. It was the cold and the weight of what she already knew. Her name was Emma Blake, though her reputation had preceded her long before she stepped out of the dark. Once an investigative reporter for the Tribune, she had vanished from the public eye after her editor shut down a story that was too dangerous to print. There had been whispers, harassment, threats, the kind of quiet blacklisting reserved for those who dig too deep. Now, standing in that decaying boathouse, she looked like someone who dug her way back out. "I followed the same trail," she said, lifting the recorder just enough to catch her voice. "The trucks, the false manifests, the names that disappear off border records. Everfreight is just the shell." Noah's expression tightened. His hand, still resting on the papers, stilled completely. "You've seen this before." Emma stepped closer, her boots crunching lightly over the ice. "I've seen the bodies that don't make it into reports, and I've seen the men who sign the orders and call it logistics." She stopped near the table, her eyes scanning the pages. "Those codes, F9, F12, they match the shipments I traced 3 months ago." For a long moment, the only sound was the distant grind of ice beneath the pier. Raymond studied her silently, his weathered face unreadable but not unkind. She seemed out of place in the ruin, too precise, too deliberate, like a flame trying to survive inside a storm. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, its edges warped from water. "Found this near the truck last night," he said simply. "Didn't have time to look." Emma took it with both hands. Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Inside lay a thin ledger, pages of handwritten lists, all in the same slanted pen. No names, no countries, no ages, just numbers, hundreds of them. Each line ending in a neat check mark, as though someone had been keeping an inventory of souls. The final page bore a single signature scrawled across the bottom: H. Alcott Industries. Her breath caught. She blinked once, twice, the way people do when the mind rejects what the heart already understands. Noah leaned forward, the name tearing through the last barrier of disbelief. Henry Alcott, he murmured, his voice almost breaking on the consonants. The words fell like stones into the stillness. Emma lifted her eyes slowly. The former border division chief, she said quietly. Now a congressman, the one selling the idea of safer borders. Outside, the tide shifted, scraping chunks of ice against the pier's underbelly, a slow, grinding sound like the earth turning in its sleep. Noah's face had gone pale again, though not from the cold. His gaze drifted to the far wall, where frost had begun to crawl upward, veins of white threading through wood. He was in charge of internal oversight, he said, almost to himself. He was the one who approved my transfers, my assignments, all of it. No one spoke for a while. The silence became heavy, pressing against their ribs. Raymond stared out through a broken pane toward the horizon, where sunlight flickered faintly over the water. The reflection quivered, fragile, like the line between truth and the things built to hide it. Emma closed the folder carefully, her gloves brushing the edges, as though afraid to bruise the pages further. Her eyes softened, though her jaw stayed set. If this is true, she whispered, every frozen truck in this harbor is a grave. Noah didn't look up. He didn't have to. The truth was already burning behind his eyes. The sea answered for them, its low, mournful rhythm carrying the sound of 1,000 unseen stories. The snow returned that night, thick and unrelenting, swallowing Everidge beneath a hush so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The docks were gone under white silence, and the sea itself seemed frozen mid-motion, caught between storm and surrender. North of the harbor, the old lighthouse stood alone against the wind, its black stone spine rising through the blizzard like a relic that refused to die. Inside, the walls groaned with each gust, and the faint hum of a dying generator trembled through the floorboards. The light at the top had long since gone dark, but tonight something else burned inside. Defiance. Emma Blake sat on the floor beside a rusted desk, her laptop's dim screen flickering blue over her face. Every few seconds, the machine wheezed as the generator coughed out another pulse of power. Lines of decrypted data scrolled down her screen. Alcott's shell companies, offshore transfers, encrypted memos signed by hands too powerful to name. Each file connected him to another hidden route, another shipment, another human life erased behind bureaucratic ink. Her eyes flicked toward the upload bar inching forward, a slow climb toward revelation. Noah Carter paced behind her, the tension in his movements visible even through fatigue. His hand rested near the sidearm holstered at his hip, his jaw clenched, eyes darting to the narrow window each time the storm howled. Raymond Cole sat near the small stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. The smell cut through the cold like a fragment of home, bitter and grounding, a reminder that even amidst betrayal and death, warmth could still be summoned if one knew where to look. The veteran's hands shook slightly as he passed the cup to Noah, the steam curling between them like memory. Max and Shadow guarded the doorway, 2 silhouettes etched in the pale light of the snow-swarmed night. Max, steady and broad, stood alert, ears forward. Shadow leaned close to his shoulder, smaller and still limping from the wound, his breath visible in soft, rhythmic clouds. Between them, an unspoken code, duty not taught but remembered. Outside, the wind clawed at the glass with icy fingers, the sound scraping against the heart as much as the walls. Then came a sound that didn't belong. A crunch, boots on frozen gravel. Raymond froze mid-motion, cup halfway to his lips. Noah lifted his head. The dogs stiffened instantly, a low growl rumbling from Max's chest. The next moment, lightning flared across the sea, and through the cracked window, dark figures appeared, silhouettes against the storm, rifles glinting with the cold light of steel. "Down!" Noah hissed, pulling Emma toward the corner. Gunfire erupted, tearing through the lighthouse walls. The old stone spat dust and glass as the first rounds struck. The generator stuttered, lights blinking once before plunging the room into darkness. The sound of the storm roared louder, the snow turning into a white curtain that masked the world beyond. Raymond's body moved before his mind did. He dragged Noah behind the stone railing near the stairwell, the impact sending pain flaring through his leg but not slowing him down. His hands, though trembling from age and cold, found purpose in precision. The old instincts came back like muscle memory awakened from slumber. He sighted through the broken slats, returned fire, controlled bursts, measured breath, each shot answering the chaos outside. The smell of gunpowder tangled with salt and snow. Emma crouched near the desk, shielding her laptop with her arms. The upload bar crawled on, 72%, 73%, 75%. Every second stretched longer than the last. Her breath came in small, ragged bursts, fogging the screen. The generator sputtered again, the light dimming but holding. Outside, voices shouted, sharp commands, muffled by the storm but close enough to taste. Alcott's private security. The men who cleaned up messes before the world ever knew they existed. A bullet struck the wall inches above her head. She flinched, but didn't stop typing. "It's almost done," she whispered to no one. Shadow barked sharply, leaping toward the door just as a figure appeared in the frame. The shot came too fast, a crack of thunder within the storm, and Shadow cried out. A small, sharp sound swallowed immediately by the wind. He stumbled, his flank grazed, fur streaked with red. Max lunged forward, his body covering the younger dog, teeth bared, a single growl splitting the chaos. Raymond's chest tightened at the sight. He fired again, his vision blurring, hearing reduced to the rhythm of gunfire and storm. Noah crawled beside him, returning shots through the shattered window. Outside, one silhouette fell. Another advanced. The snow made ghosts of them all. Emma's hands shook as she reached for the emergency kit beside the desk, her eyes darting between Shadow's wound and the flickering progress bar. 83%, the number burned into her vision. The upload couldn't stop now, not after everything. She grabbed a flare from the box, twisted off the cap with trembling fingers. The red stick hissed to life, bleeding color into the dark like an open wound. "Don't," Raymond began, but she already had. Emma hurled the flare through the broken window. It arced into the storm, spinning, hissing, a single streak of defiance cutting across the white void. When it burst, the sky ignited crimson, reflecting against the snow and sea, painting the lighthouse in ghostly red light. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The gunfire, the wind, even time itself, as that flare screamed into the heavens. Then, in the distance, through the howl of the blizzard, something answered. Sirens, faint, fractured, but real. Somewhere miles away, a Coast Guard patrol had seen the wound of light and turned toward it. Hope, small and stubborn, had found a frequency through the storm. Inside, the fight pressed on. Raymond's breath came, shallow now. His vision flickered between clarity and haze. Noah shouted something, but the words were swallowed by the wind. The last thing Raymond saw before the world dimmed was Max standing over Shadow, muzzle lifted, barking into the void, as if daring the night itself to come closer. Then, through the chaos, he heard it. The sirens cutting through the wind, the sound of something human pushing back against the dark. And for a fleeting moment before everything fell silent, it sounded like salvation. Dawn came like an apology, slow, reluctant, and stained by smoke. The snow that had buried Everidge through the night now melted in streaks of gray, curling around the edges of burned crates and splintered docks. Across the harbor, the wail of sirens fractured the silence, joined by the steady rumble of engines. FBI convoys rolled in from the South Road, their headlights glinting off the ice like searchlights over a battlefield. Beyond the inlet, Coast Guard ships cut through the black water, their hulls ghost-like against the fog. For the first time in years, justice had found its way to this forgotten port. Raymond Cole stirred beneath a wool blanket, his head heavy, his leg throbbing from the night's fight. The world came back in fragments, the faint static of radios, the metallic scent of salt and cordite, the echo of Emma Blake's voice somewhere behind him, steady, unyielding, alive. She sat at a makeshift command table, a headset pressed to her ear, reading coordinates into a channel alive with overlapping voices. Shipment IDs confirmed. Route 12, Dock 7, manifest codes match the ledger. Repeat, match confirmed. Her voice, hoarse from exhaustion, carried the conviction of someone who had stopped asking for permission to tell the truth. Noah Carter stood outside the broken doorway, his breath visible in the dawn's weak light. The wind tugged at his torn jacket, revealing the bandage that ran across his shoulder, darkened from blood and seawater. Max stood beside him, still, alert, every muscle tensed. The German shepherd's coat was matted with frost, his eyes bright and watchful, as if he alone understood the fragile balance of this moment. A few feet away, Shadow rested, his wound freshly dressed, his chest rising with slow, stubborn breaths. Beyond them, the harbor churned with chaos. Agents moved in formation through the fog, voices sharp over radios, while armed men scattered like startled birds. Alcott's private guards, those who had survived the night, were dragging crates toward a freighter moored at the far pier, its name half erased by rust. The air smelled of diesel and fear. Gunfire cracked again, brief and desperate, swallowed quickly by the sea wind. Raymond pushed himself upright, gripping the railing for balance. He could see it now, the heart of the operation unraveling before his eyes. Trucks overturned, containers torn open, each one revealing what the ledgers had hidden. Rows of empty restraints, blankets, and tags marked only with numbers, evidence of a system too cruel to have ever been accidental. He turned toward Noah, whose face had hardened into something between duty and mourning. The soldier in him had reawakened, but so had the man who had lost faith in uniforms. Then the crowd at the pier parted, and Henry Alcott stepped into view. He looked almost immaculate amid the ruin, gray hair slicked back, wool coat buttoned to the collar, shoes gleaming despite the snow. Only his eyes betrayed him, pale fury, sharp enough to slice through the storm. He stood on the loading platform like a man still convinced of his own immunity. "You can't stop this," he shouted across the wind. His voice was smooth, commanding, trained for podiums. "You think justice cares who freezes first? You think any of this changes what keeps the border standing?" Noah stepped forward through the smoke, Max pacing beside him. His breath came slow, controlled, the same rhythm as years ago, when he faced men who thought themselves untouchable. The morning light caught the frost on his jacket, turning him ghost-like but grounded. "Maybe not," he said, his tone level as a blade. But I do. The first shot came from somewhere near the freighter. The sound shattered the fragile quiet, echoing off the water. Max lunged instinctively, colliding with a guard who had raised his weapon toward Noah. The man went down hard, the rifle clattering into the snow. Max stood over him, growling low, teeth bared, eyes locked. Another gun barked in the distance, and Raymond moved before he thought. Limping forward, his body fueled by something older than strength. He grabbed Noah's shoulder, pulling him back just as a bullet tore through the fog, close enough to sing past his ear. The shot that was meant for Noah found the metal railing instead, sparking cold fire. Noah turned, eyes wide. Raymond's hand still clutched his sleeve, blood already seeping through the veteran's coat where the recoil had jolted his wounded leg. But the old man didn't flinch. He only looked at him, wordless understanding passing between them, the kind forged in moments when life weighs less than what's right. Behind them, Emma's voice rose again, carried through the wind by a field radio one of the agents held. All routes confirmed. Files verified. Coast Guard approaching Dock 7. Seal the perimeter. The orders traveled outward, multiplying through radios, until the whole harbor seemed to move under her command. Within minutes, agents swarmed the pier. Floodlights cut through the fog. Men in tactical vests seized the crates, cuffed the remaining guards, shouted coordinates to one another through the din. The freighter's engines sputtered, then died. The illusion of power that had sustained Alcott began to crumble beneath the weight of evidence and consequence. When they took him, Alcott didn't resist. He stood motionless as the agents closed in, his face drained of color but not of arrogance. "You'll learn," he muttered under his breath, almost inaudible. "The world runs on compromise." But the world, in that fragile morning light, seemed to disagree. The sun broke through the clouds just as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Golden light spilled across the ice, turning the harbor into a mirror of something redeemed. For a brief moment, the snow didn't feel cold. It shimmered like mercy itself. As they led Alcott toward the black SUV waiting by the pier, one of the agents held up his briefcase, found discarded near the freighter's ramp. Inside, there was no cash, no offshore account ledgers, only files, stamped and signed, detailing years of bribes paid to officers who once wore the same uniform as Noah. The betrayal had been closer than any of them had imagined. Noah stood silently, the papers fluttering in the wind like confessions. He didn't speak. His gaze drifted to Raymond, who leaned against a railing, breathing through pain but alive. Nearby, Max sat beside Shadow, both dogs quiet now, their eyes on the horizon where the sun melted gold into the sea. And for a moment, just long enough for the world to remember its balance, decency didn't feel like an illusion. It felt like something worth fighting for. Spring came quietly to Everidge, as if the town itself were learning how to breathe again. The snow that had once smothered the harbor melted into silver veins that threaded through the docks, glinting beneath the soft hands of the morning sun. The cranes no longer groaned like ghosts. Their arms stretched toward the sky, idle and at peace, as gulls circled lazily above the thawed water. The air, once heavy with smoke and sirens, now carried the scent of salt, lilac, and renewal. Down by the old pier, the Animal Rescue Center had reopened, its walls freshly painted, but still bearing the faint scars of fire and frost. Inside, Raymond moved with the steady patience of someone who had known both war and forgiveness. His limp remained, though softer now, a shadow rather than a chain. Max followed him faithfully, his gait slower, his muzzle dusted with gray, but his eyes still bright with the calm confidence of a guardian who had seen the worst of man and stayed. Each morning began the same. Raymond filled the water bowls, checked the feed, and opened the doors to the kennels where stray dogs waited, creatures lost to storms, hunger, or indifference. He spoke little, but his silence had a gentleness to it, the kind that told the animals they were safe without needing to understand the words. Max would lie by the door, head resting on his paws, watching each movement with quiet approval. In that rhythm of care, time softened its edge. Across town, Noah Carter had returned to uniform, though it wasn't the same kind of service as before. The Border Patrol insignia had been replaced by a crest marked Human Recovery Division. His team didn't chase fugitives anymore. They found the forgotten, the trafficked, the lost. His voice over the radio carried the same calm steadiness it always had, but now it carried purpose instead of command. And though the world would never see the nights that haunted him, he carried them like a compass pointing toward compassion. Emma Blake's article had traveled farther than any of them could have imagined. The frozen truth of Everidge ran on every major outlet by the time spring unfurled its first leaves. The story stirred lawmakers, investigations, and outrage, but more than that, it stirred conscience. For every name that had been erased, another voice rose to remember. Lives were saved not by the story's anger, but by its quiet insistence that human decency still mattered. She never wrote about herself, only about those who never made it home. One afternoon, when the sky turned the color of pewter and the wind smelled faintly of rain, they met again by the docks. The memorial had been finished the week before, a ring of white lilies encircling a plaque etched with nothing but numbers. No names, just the count of the unnamed. Each stem swayed gently in the sea breeze, their petals trembling as if they still listened for the footsteps of the ones they mourned. Emma arrived first. Notebook in hand, though, she didn't write. Her hair caught in the wind, strands lifting and falling across her face. Noah came next, his jacket zipped high, eyes scanning the horizon as though habit still dictated he find the threat before the peace. Raymond followed, Max at his side, moving with the ease of someone who no longer needed to hurry. No words passed between them for a long while. The sound of the sea filled the space instead, slow, forgiving, endless. The water lapped gently against the pier, erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. Somewhere far beyond, a freighter groaned as it turned toward open water, its horn low and mournful, like a memory bidding farewell. Raymond knelt beside the memorial, his hand resting on Max's head. The dog leaned closer, eyes half closed, tail brushing lightly against his boot. For a moment, it felt as though the world had narrowed to that single point of contact. Man and dog, survivor and witness, warmth against the endless gray. In that small silence, there was something holy. He didn't pray, not out loud. He didn't need to. The act itself, the stillness, the hand, the loyalty beside him, was prayer enough. The others stood back, letting the moment belong to him. Emma watched the lilies tremble, the sunlight catching their white edges like halos. Noah's eyes followed a gull as it rode the wind toward the horizon. None of them spoke about what had been lost or what had been found. Some stories didn't need to end in words. They ended in understanding. As the afternoon waned, the sea shifted color once more, from silver to gold to the deep amber of memory. Shadows stretched long across the pier, and Max lifted his head, gaze fixed on something beyond the horizon. His ears twitched, and Raymond followed his line of sight, though he saw only the vastness of the sea. Still, he smiled, because he understood. Some part of them would always be listening for echoes of the storm, of the siren, of the cry that once split the night. The wind rose softly, scattering petals from the lilies across the water. They floated outward in gentle procession, bright against the dark tide. Raymond exhaled, the breath carrying with it something lighter than before. Grief, yes, but woven now with gratitude. He looked down at Max, whose eyes glimmered in the fading light, and the old veteran whispered, not words of command, not even words of farewell, but a quiet promise between two souls who had kept each other alive. The sea answered with its rhythm. The lighthouse in the distance, repaired now, blinked once, twice, then settled into its steady pulse. And somewhere beyond the waves, a ship's horn cried out, not in sorrow, but remembrance. The wind carried the sound across the harbor like a benediction. Justice isn't always loud. The narrator's voice lingered in the air, low and sure. Sometimes it's just a man, a dog, and the choice to care. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger, quietly, like the hum of the sea after a storm, or the warmth that stays in a hand long after it lets go. What happened here wasn't about heroes or villains. It was about the small, steadfast choices that keep the world from freezing over. Some people wear courage like armor. Others carry it in silence, in the way they reach out to help, in the way they stay when it would be easier to walk away. And sometimes it isn't people at all. Sometimes it's a loyal dog who doesn't understand the word quit, or a tired soul who still believes kindness has a place in this world. The harbor will move on. The seasons will turn. But in certain corners of memory, the light never fades. It only softens. And maybe that's enough. Because justice isn't always written in laws or headlines. Sometimes it lives in the quiet hearts of those who refuse to stop caring. And if you ever find yourself standing in the cold, wondering if goodness still matters, listen closely. You might just hear the sound of it, steady, breathing, alive, beneath the wind.